Okay. Okay. So last week we were talking about animal sentience. We assumed that kind of for the sake of our discussion, because this is what most policy sort of is built around, we assumed a utilitarian framework where the goal is cause the least amount of suffering and bring about the most amount of happiness on average for sentient beings, because it's only sentient beings that we care about. If you kill a bunch of NPCs in a video game, that doesn't affect the utilitarian calculus. We don't care about things that don't have some experience of the world and specifically have some capacity for genuine suffering or genuine happiness. And then that leads us to the question, which beings are sentient? And we saw the Ascent project working on that. I feel so overwhelming sense just for our discussion, and also what the authors of the Ascent project think is that we're still quite a ways from having a really sound answer to which animals are regarded as sentient. What we need is some deep scientific theory about what sentience is, such that you can go look for it in the world. We saw the multiple reliability problem. Basically, identical. You can't just say, well, the term being like brain and it's sentient, because lots of things have very different brains from us and do a lot of the same stuff as us. It's just not plausible that it's going to have exactly the same neural anatomy. That's a diagnostic criteria for sentience. So you need some understanding of what sentience is and how it works, and then you can come up with methods of finding it in the world. And we really don't have that yet. We don't have that yet. Okay, so does that sound about right to you all? Where we left off? Any thoughts on that? Residual thoughts from last week? Okay. So this week, we're going to dive into Hindu environmental ethics. They have an account of what makes something sentient. That is, every living thing participates in Atman, which is a kind of pure conscious awareness. And Atman is ultimately comes from Brahman, the ultimate kind of ground of reality. It's oversimplifying it to call it a soul, but in the Western language, that's probably the closest word we have, something like a soul. And that applies to humans and animals and plants as well. And all of those have this kind of baseline witness consciousness, this experiencing, this element of experience, and it is a metaphysically substantial thing. It's a kind of stuff inside them that causes them to have this. So this is in fact a theory of consciousness. It's not a scientific theory particularly, but it is one. And what we'll do this week is sort of look at what this kind of consequences this has for their relationship with the living world. I want to note, I'll note this again as we get into it, but there's you can't sort of just graft this discussion we'll have today onto a straightforward utilitarian framework. As we'll see, Hindu philosophy talks quite a lot about trying to, for example, minimize the harm that you do to other sentient beings. That's one of the virtues in the kind of broad ethical system. But it also posits that there is a kind of higher good than that. Not causing harm is one of the means that might get you towards this goal, but the kind of like transcendent goal is liberation from the cycle of rebirth. So your little chunk of Atman, after you die, goes into another body to be reincarnated. And that goes on forever and ever unless you achieve moksha or liberation and are liberated from the cycle of rebirth. And that doesn't super duper fit onto the utilitarian framework. It's not, you can't sort of straightforwardly map it on there. So there's certainly concern with the kind of thing that utilitarians are concerned with, but there's another type of concern that is sort of central to the ethical system. And we'll see that it has somewhat complex interactions with the kind of more mundane ethical questions that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. Those of us who are like on the cusp of liberation from samsara or whatever. So just to flag that before we get going. Okay, so here are the plans for today. I'm actually going to start by talking about what environmental ethics means. What is that? What does it cover? I'm going to give you the crashiest crash course on Hinduism that has possibly ever crashed. This is there's going to be a lot of this during this course. Properly getting a handle on Hinduism is the multiple lifetimes of study. We're going to see what we can do in less than an hour. That's what we got. And then we're going to look at a couple of arguments about this field. So this is what I'm showing you right now. Hinduism and Environmental Ethics is a book by philosopher Christopher Framarin. We read a chapter or a journal article, which is basically the first chapter of this book. So I'll talk a little bit about the main reading, but I'll draw a couple of arguments for this book. And what Framarin wants to do is tease out how the basic tenets of Hinduism lead to what he calls a plausible environmental ethic. Plausible for him just means like it gives you the basically intuitive right responses, like it's not okay to crash around and just destroy the natural world for yucks. Like you should be basically nice to animals. You should not burn down all the forests just because you feel like it. If your environmental ethic produces those results, he considers it to be not a plausible one. Basic concern for the environment is assumed to be one of the marks of like getting it at least sort of right. And so he tries to square that one. How do you get from the kind of metaphysical and ethical framework of Hinduism to a plausible environmental ethic? And he'll look at a couple. We'll go through a couple of arguments that people have advanced in literature. He's going to tell us why they're not good arguments, and then we'll talk about his work. So that's the plan. And for one more minute at the very end, we'll talk about it. I think it's an interesting response to one of the things when I was researching this lecture to write it was why. So we'll see Hinduism advocates for vegetarianism, but they don't seem to be super concerned with eating plants. And recall, I just told you that they think that plants also have Atman. Why is it that it's okay to eat animals and not plants? I think Jainism has a very straightforward and well-developed answer to that question, the closely related sort of philosophy of Jainism. So we'll do that at the very end. Okay? Ready? Let's go. Okay. So first thing, environmental ethics. What is this thing? It's what it says on the tin. It's the ethics of how you treat the environment. It's a sub-discipline of ethics that asks about our ethical obligations towards the natural environment. And specifically, I want to carve in what makes it ethical rather than anything else. So we'll distinguish two forms of obligation that you might have: prudential and intrinsic. So here's a prudential obligation. Don't burn down every forest and boil every ocean, because then we all die. We need the natural world to keep us alive, and that's and presumably you don't want to die. That's the kind of prudential obligation. This is the kind of thing that you're asking questions about how should we treat the natural world such that we get what we want out of it, something like that. Don't let the bees die because they pollinate our crops, that sort of thing. So these are prudential questions. Prudential obligations are your obligations such that you continue to live a good life, or a nice life, that you get the things that you want. Now, that is obviously a huge area of serious study, but it's not the main thing of environmental ethics, I take it. Mostly, environmental ethics wants to ask questions about what we call intrinsic obligations. This is the question of like, what do we owe to the natural world, not because we want stuff out of it, but for its own sake? What do you owe to life for life's own sake, not because of something that life will give to you? You might well think that this only applies to sentient life, but there's actually quite a debate in environmental ethics about that. So I've actually on this slide, I've prejudged one of the central questions. So how much consideration do we owe to the interests of non-human organisms? But there is a there is an ongoing debate in the kind of literature and environmental ethics that maybe it goes beyond organisms. So we talked last week about our ethical obligations towards animals. Nobody in this debate, as far as I know, thinks we have no ethical obligations to animals. We'll talk about one. Rene Descartes thinks we basically have no intrinsic obligations to animals. You might have prudential obligations, like don't treat your farm animals badly because they'll die and then you don't get to eat this winter. But Descartes thinks we have basically no intrinsic responsibilities towards animals. I don't think that you decide to study and write about environmental ethics if you think that. Sort of a selection effect to even bother participating in this conversation. So basically, everybody thinks that we have some kind of obligation toward animals. You might think that we also have intrinsic obligations towards plants. You shouldn't just wreck plants for the fun of it. More controversially, some people actually think that you have to consider the intrinsic rights of something like a whole ecosystem. So, like, if you took a whole forest and then like individually nabbed every living thing in it and put it in a zoo in a separate enclosure, you might still have done something wrong because what you did was demolish the ecosystem. You went there, and that's the more, it's on the controversial end of things. Not everybody thinks that an ecosystem can have kind of interests or rights, or that we could have obligations towards them. Some people in this conversation thinks you might have ethical obligations to literal geological formation, like mountains or rivers, something like that. We'll see. We'll talk in a couple of weeks about. There are some really interesting lawsuits working their way through the courts right now, where indigenous groups sue to try to establish the personhood of, say, a river. So legal personhood for something like a river. Now, their reasoning for that is largely based in their understanding of the natural world that maybe we don't necessarily share, but it is the kind of conversation that happens within environmental. So that's the topic. That clear enough? Good. Okay. So specifically, Hindu environmental ethics. So environmental ethics, you can come at it from any philosophical, metaphysical, cultural framework that you're interested in. This week, we're going to look at Hinduism and environmental ethics, and we'll look at a few of those. But before we do any of that, let's talk about what Hinduism is. A caveat, which is that it's probably silly to think of Hinduism as a religion, in the sense that it is rather a overlapping network of different beliefs and practices and all that stuff, philosophies. There's a huge diversity within Hinduism. I am familiar with the rough outlines. There's a kind of unifying thread that runs throughout the traditions that people usually call Hinduism. And we're going to grab, because trying to familiarize ourselves with the vast complexity of Hinduisms in general is not a plausible thing for us to do. We're going to go way back to what many people consider the unifying thread amongst Hinduisms, which is the literature called the Vedas. So the Vedas, this absolutely massive collection of texts, which is the sort of like oldest layer of Hindu literature. These are they're sacred texts. They're regarded as, in some sense, authorless. That is, somebody a very, very long time ago had these texts transmitted to them from some superhuman entity, and they've been orally transmitted kind of thousands of years using some of the most astonishingly rigorous mnemonic practices I've ever encountered. It's a massive corpus of text, and their interest in, it's a sort of lifetime of training to be able to chant it, and they'll do stuff like have you chant a section, and then have you chant, the words like A, B, C, B, C, D, C, D, E. And they'll break it up into like 6 different ways of going through it. And it's an astonishing feat of kind of like mnemonic prowess that they've got, as much text as they have faithfully transmitted for as long as it's been transmitted. Anyway, so for the content of the Vedas, it's a huge variety of materials, from description of rituals, stories about the gods, and straight up philosophical discourse. And okay, so let's stop you. And it's sort of, if you had to pick something that was common across the various versions of Hinduism, probably some reliance on this corpus of text would be the thing. This is what unifies it. And but you'll be unsurprised to hear that over thousands of years and billions of people, there are some disagreements about exactly how to interpret them have arisen. So there's a bunch of different sort of schools of Indian philosophy, classical Indian philosophy, with different ways of interpreting the kind of central messages. We're not going to have to do any of that today, because we're going to start with the most basic central tenets that are pretty much universal. And this is our main reading for this week. Framarin, again, draws on the most basic central points. Okay. Okay, and let's do some of that now, unless there's any questions, comments, or concerns. Is this material familiar to anybody already? I don't know if you've done any reading on this. I'm seeing 2 people waggle their hands in the kind of sense. Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, half a dozen people. That's excellent. I love telling people new things rather than things that they already know. Actually, I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so I skimmed over this at the very beginning. Let's go through it more carefully. They've got a theory of what makes something sentient, which is that it's got Atman. Really, really loosely translated, a soul or a self. But it's not your personality. It's nothing really specific to you. The Atman is none of your particular properties. It's not any of your beliefs or desires or goals or hurts or joys. None of these are really Atman. Atman is this, they call witness consciousness, that makes all of those things that you experience possible, such that you can have a will, you can have opinions, you can have desires, you can do stuff. All of that is enabled by the presence of Atman, but Atman isn't any of those things. Atman, so it's this sort of like core of your experience. It's been before, prior to, and the basis of everything that you have in your kind of conscious life. And it's related somehow to Brahman. So Brahman, and I say somehow because this is one of the points on which there's quite a bit of debate in the kind of classical Indian philosophy. It's related to Brahman, which is kind of the ultimate principle of reality. Brahman is the kind of origin or source of all being. So the basic thought is that you have within you this sort of fragment, Atman, of the fundamental basis of reality, Brahman. And they might be, so the debate is, they might be actually identical. They might be one and the same thing. One might be an aspect of the other. One might have sort of emanated the other. That's the kind of debate that we have. For our purposes, it won't matter too much. That's a nice thought, right? That if you dig down into your own experience far enough, if you get into the core of who and what you are at the very foundation, you'll find reality itself. Okay, so Atman, like Brahman, is eternal, timeless and eternal, unaffected by changing material conditions. It's something that, when you get hurt, they say, fire doesn't burn it, pain doesn't touch it, cold doesn't freeze it. It is unchanged and unchanging. It's this sort of bit of eternity that's inside you. But it's what connects you to other incarnations. So when you were born, Atman becomes attached to you, and when you die, it moves on to another body. And there's a kind of uh, uh, karmic residue that comes with it. So if you behave virtuously in this life, you might get a nice reincarnation. The next life you're born into might be a good one. Human births are generally considered so this is what's called the cycle of samsara. This is a common idea amongst Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. In all three of these, being born a human means you did something really good in past lives. Because there are way nastier things you could be born into. You don't really want to be born an ant or a plant. You could have been born into one of these like hell realms where it's just torment for 10,000 years while all of your bad karma is burned away. You got born somewhere pretty nice. Now, there's also places that are nicer that you could have been reincarnated. You could be reincarnated in, say, a diva or a Brahmin, which is like you could be float in eternal bliss for 10,000 years. Generally speaking, that's considered to be, it's a nice rebirth, but it's not really the one you want because the human world has the right mix of pleasure and pain. If you're being tortured in hell for 10,000 years, you're not really going to get it together enough to advance spiritually. And similarly, if you're floating in paradise for 10,000 years, you probably aren't motivated enough to do the hard work of advancing spiritually. So the human realm is somewhere between those extremes. You did something good to get here, and this is your chance. This is your opportunity, they say, to become moored from this endless cycle of rebirth. For those of us who don't I don't particularly believe in reincarnation, it might sound nice, actually. It might sound like, oh, great. No matter how badly I screw up this time, I'm going to get another chance. Awesome. But it's generally regarded as a kind of unfortunate thing. Being in this endless cycle of reincarnation is generally regarded as an unfortunate thing because life is kind of hard. Ask yourself if you would do this another 10,000 times. Would you live another trillion times? Would you live another trillion times? Or would you eventually start going, oh man, this is a lot. And a lot of those times you are a beetle and you just get squished. Like a lot of the times you're not born. A lot of those times you are not born into this relatively fortunate human birth. You're going to have a lot of really tough times. Yeah.
But in this idea, and it says you, like, or just like the stuff, looking out, not so it's so it's all but it's really it's on you. It's not going with a kind of thinking to a life that is unlistenable. This even the cause of that. People about like virtuous or you're gonna have get stuff. I'm to meet people. That stuff. That's very different. To the dominating or we're very wants to is that really or because are you your is it parents or do your reaching after your language or to something more like that? I'm gonna say best or somebody and well what's the thing to just go to go ice in a ball. All right. Imagine what of your bit off back but slow you look like this. Go to right. Yeah, I think was stick blah blah. If you're reading correlated with that's for general speaking, like those words via that for right. The record reacts is just for how to think of that with people come along, yeah, or referee or with older that's a good having nothing you could do. So that what that does is we're also that But if you step underneath the tree, it gives it like a continual and we have people love it. So, yeah, that's a kind of unpleasant thing. But and that whatever happened to slow with that curve did have it in the jet. Should have been broke down or making you just I think like you can give it a humor is already have the most bird walk for less. But being water in the three door going to one of the elements is so way too hungry. So I think that's about 30 ways. And there are so it's there are similar. If the protein virtual just have more sense of that's still think like God sent you to purgatory and you know going to have a wallet something I was going to guess or personal. It's just sort of a law of nature that wants not try to keep you back you have. They're not going to go for it's not the balance.
Okay, so
I mean, yeah. So we are talking about like in regards to ethics and how they think. Yeah, like what it damn like
yeah.
But there are almost like carbon and shit.
Yeah.
I get better or the bug lets that there's a little pin and then it's better for it if I start on it. It's I mean it's suffering, which then it had it out horribly and being created as something better.
I had that exact same question. If the point about one of the benefits of being a bug or a tree or something like that is burning karma, shouldn't I go use a magnifying glass to burn all the bugs I see so they burn off their karma more? And the Vedic answer is something like, that's not your job. It's not your job to deal out karma. You're supposed to be, I mean, the ideal human system is doing your best without expecting anything from the world. And you're supposed to answer something like, it's up to the gods to do that aspect of the universe. It's not your job. So it's sort of taking on more that it's like if students starting opt on to focus instead of like students like please don't do that. That's not your job here. Yeah. I had the exact same question though. I had to do some serious digging to find an answer. But the answer is something like, that's not going to roll. Let's deal with your okay. So are we signing up for a trillion years of rebirth? Who's in? Go. Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. I'm not sure I would be up for it. I think if I firmly believed that I was to be reborn pretty much eternally, and they invent systems of staggeringly huge numbers in this kind of cultural context to represent how long it is you're actually going to be in reincarnation, partly to kind of get clear to people what they're in for, unless they attempt to get out of society. Yeah. I believe so. So if you try to take on the role of your gods yourself, Hindu culture is pretty red hot on being in your proper place in the world. This is all alongside the caste system, for example, the caste system, where like different people are born into different like social roles, and your family has had that social role, and you don't ever work your way up the caste system to like become the priestly caste or something like that. They're pretty red hot on doing the best job of being in your place in the world that you can, and that might earn you a better rebirth in the next time. So taking on the role of the gods is like the worst version of that. Yeah.
I wouldn't say like increase.
So the standard answer to that is that our world is a tiny, tiny fraction of the kind of world system. And also remember, like, okay, so then we went from less than 1 billion people to 8 billion people. That's a square kilometer of bugs. So maybe more, maybe more people. I suppose that there is only this one world. There's plenty of bugs and plants and stuff around. There's more than enough Atman to account for its human population. In fact, we've killed massive. Actually, the question is, where did all the souls go? Because since we industrialized, we killed off quite a lot of the life on this planet. Yeah, well, if you have a problem, it's exactly the opposite problem. But we're one world, a very large system of worlds. So the accounting kind of works. Yeah. Good. I'm glad you've got some curiosity about this sort. Yeah.
Think that the world's also like, or is it other life?
So no, I know this there are realms where they're for non human
places like other us or like works. You go off the foods.
But if you really could get recovery to the world where listed for like 1,000,000 years. I don't know for foods.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's ever any story that I just thought of it before the older into or at gaze out for the like well, women's swear. Again, but just love her going to so your great papers. I would be shocked with everybody starts on there that they will it's almost so we should expect to get in close up with the sleep and maybe that's I were there. I'm surprised nobody can. Yeah. No. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, they are
Like brother Paris. Like I
yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think there's any worry about the sort of potency of like how many of us there are. There's lots. There's lots of them. Okay. Do you feel like you got the basic idea? Okay. So supposing that you are not, say, up for a trillion years of being mostly bugs and sometimes humans and whatever, you might want to try to achieve moksha or liberation from the cycle of samsara. And exactly how you go about this is one of the red hot debates in various schools of Hinduism. There are huge varieties of opinions about this. But one really, really consistent thing is so two things that are very consistent has something to do with understanding your own nature. It has something to do with seeing inside yourself, seeing this kind of basis of Atman. And to even kind of get to that stage, you probably have to do, well, you have to do quite a lot of living virtuously. That is without causing harm to other sentient beings. So you want to get liberated from the cycle of samsara, you better be ready to do some virtues. One of the central virtues, there's a bunch of them, but one of the central ones, the one that's most relevant to us, is ahimsa. Roughly translates to non-harm or non-violence. Himsa is the opposite of that. Himsa is doing harm or doing violence. And it's understood to produce kind of negative karmic consequences. If you go around hurting people that you didn't need to hurt, you're bound, you're sort of karmically bound. And that will have to be paid off eventually. So again, various schools are going to say different things. Is self-defense, himsa or ahimsa. You get different answers if you ask different people. But the basic idea is it's pretty much what it sounds like. Be nice to things. When the opportunity arises, be nice to sentient beings. And to return to the very first question, the very crude question that we started with, Hindu philosophy generally says it's not okay to eat and kill animals. Generally. Um, Killing and eating animals is considered himsa. There's a few small wrinkles in this. Older Vedic texts talk about animal sacrifice. Like the really oldest layers of that literature mention animal sacrifices, but more recent layers say, well, but they say stuff like this. The person who performs the horse sacrifice every single year for 100 years and the one who will not eat meat are equal. The result, follow of merit, punya of these two is equal. Horse sacrifice is like a 1 year long ritual. It's very elaborate. You got to be rich to do it even once. And at the end of it, you sacrifice a horse. And they say doing that every 100 years, once a year every 100 years is about the same as being a vegetarian. So they mention animal sacrifice sometimes. There are some mentions in the Vedas of gods killing animals. They seem to be there are situations where that was kind of necessary. There's a big long debates about that. But the basic thought, you probably shouldn't kill and eat animals, is extremely consistent and widely held. Yeah. Okay. So just one last thought. We'll take a break and sort of see how this plays in mental ethics. I want to return to the thought that, okay, so you might get the mistaken impression, and I don't want you to get the mistaken impression, that liberation is a matter of racking up virtue points. And once you get enough virtue points, you're liberated. Like the video game model of the cycle of samsara. That's not what's going on. Doing meritorious actions brings good karma, but the ultimate goal is disentangling from karma altogether. So you might see somebody who is a sort of like serious spiritual aspirant, you try to live a good life, be nice to people, be nice to animals, but the end of your life, you might retire from the community, like leave the community, try to be alone, disengage from things. They're not trying to like run around and do as much charity work as they can. They are disentangling themselves from life altogether. So eventually you want to stop. You have to get to this point, you have to have done a bunch of virtuous actions. But once you get to a certain point, you stop trying to create good karma too. You don't want to create good or bad karma. You just want to sort of disentangle and be unmoored from the world. There's a, and this is one of the senses in which you can't just boil this down to utilitarianism, but with reincarnation. There is a kind of sacred dimension of this ethical way of seeing is in some sense as at a right angle to any of our normal worldly concern. It's orthogonal to kind of not petty, but like normal, ordinary, mundane realities of human life. That's liberation is sort of like leaving all of that behind in some sense. The analogy, the best analogy I could come up with was the Ganges River. So the Ganges River, this huge river system, it's considered deeply, deeply sacred in Hinduism. In some sense, you can, under some circumstances, all moving water is considered part of the kind of Ganges, the spiritual Ganges. And you can go there and just immersing yourself in it, wash away your sins, because the Ganges is always pure. It is spiritually pure no matter what. It's also full of poop, with literal human poop in it. Quite a bit of it. You wouldn't, if you drank a cup of it, you would probably get very sick. It's profoundly polluted in the mundane sense. But it remains spiritually pure and spiritually purifying. It's a sense in which the spiritual dimension just doesn't boil down to just being good in the ordinary, mundane, material way. Yeah. Which leaves us, I don't know, I don't know how to deal with that in the classroom, because there's in some sense, this is what these texts say over and over again, particularly about things like Atman is like any description you apply to it is going to be incorrect. It can't be captured in the work. It's that kind of thing. Similarly, the kind of spiritual ethical dimension of this is just absolute right in. You can't make policy on this basis or something like that. That's not to say it's not important, but it is just not something that's going to boil down into a simple utilitarian calculus, but with reincarnation. That's just okay. So much for preamble. Let's talk a little bit about the main reading and some of the other stuff that's from the book where this reading was taken. Okay, so this is the reading: Hinduism and Environmental Ethics, and Analysis and Defense. So the basic assumption. And I think he's got a pretty modest central thesis in this paper. Plausible environmental ethics should attribute intrinsic value to non-human parts of nature. It's fairly straightforward. We'll get to, but before we get to this, actually, I think it's worthwhile going through some of the arguments from the larger book from which this is taken, because there's a bunch of other views about how Hinduism relates to environmental ethics that he wants to refute. And then once we've seen him refuting the other ideas, we'll get to his main idea. Does that sound like a plan? Yes, it does. Okay, so his book, Framarin 2014, critiques a few arguments to try to show that animal life is only of instrumental value in Hinduism. Instrumental value is like it's good for something rather than it is good in and of itself. So the instrumental arguments all say ahimsa, which is non-harm, non-violence, towards animals is recommended only because it's an obstacle to moksha. So the argument is, look, here, okay. This is how philosophers tend to write, analytic philosophers anyway, tend to write. We like little lists of premises that lead to conclusions and sub-conclusions. If you want to write this way in your essays, that'd be great. I like this way of writing because it's very clear. What is being given as a reason to believe and what you're supposed to read is all nicely laid out. It's clunky as heck and unlovely as you want, but it's clear. It has the virtue at least of being clear. Okay, so this is not Framarin's argument. He's trying to refute this argument. Framarin wants to explain this to us and tell us why it's wrong. Okay. Certain Hindu texts and traditions claim that everything other than Atman is a product of Maya, a deluding force, and hence illusory. So basically everything in the world is a kind of delusion, except your most central witness consciousness, Atman. Anything that's illusory is devoid of intrinsic value. Hence, certain Hindu texts and traditions entail that everything other than the Atman, including animals and plants, is devoid of intrinsic value. If certain Hindu texts and traditions entail that everything other than the Atman is devoid of intrinsic value, then they entail that everything other than Atman, including animals and plants, is devoid of direct moral standing. Hence, certain Hindu texts and traditions entail that everything other than the Atman, including animals and plants, is devoid of moral standing. Me, okay. On second thought, please don't write like this. I changed my mind. It's better when we're just reading it because it's very methodical and step by step. When you read it out loud, it's like, oh yeah, all right. So one way of reading the kind of Hindu metaphysics is this whole material world is a kind of dream or a play. Brahman, in an effort to maybe amuse itself or bring more variety into the world or something, whatever ineffable purposes the ultimate principle of reality might have, has decided to pretend that little pieces of itself are not itself. Has decided to have this fun little game where pieces of the ultimate principle of reality act as though they are not one with everything. So your sense of yourself as a separate individual entity is from having a little laugh, a little jest, and all of your sense of you having problems and goals and interests and joy are part of this little play. It's of this illusion. Moksha is waking up from the illusion, realizing that actually all of your problems, all of your joys, all of your fears were just this sort of fun little play at imagining that maybe you are not one with everything. And if that's the case, who cares? kind of who cares about anything? None of our mundane, if you're having a dream and you kick a puppy in the dream, you didn't do anything morally wrong from the puppy's point of view, because that puppy doesn't exist. You can't harm an illusion. You can't do injustice to something that's not really real. So if this reality is all just an illusion, again, this is one of those points where is this reality all just an illusion is a point of serious contention amongst various schools of classical Indian philosophy. But for those who do think that it's all just an illusion, who cares what you do to an illusion? You can't hurt one. No fire burns it. No ice freezes it. No blade can cut it. You can't hurt it. So, like, who cares? Yeah. Yep.
Wait, again.
Yes, achieving enlightenment is realizing that you're the cult of evil experience, but we're record on this Atman, and Atman is really just an aspect or is identical from. So this thing at the center of you is really a piece of the ultimate municipal reality. And what you got to think something
that
it's like waking up. Sorry. Yeah.
That it's like animals and things and you all have. It happens over years. No, why would it should still not start at them?
People harm that are always without hiding out. And over. You can't prove that it's solemn and we're thankful of. This is again this. You ever saw a figure dimension that this right into us? Think this is united with French religions. Our radio couldn't share it. Neither was there. I don't want to do talking, but the doctor referred if puppy paddle, we're not so I'm the only part of us that is remaining. That when God really never, if you're occurring arguably with steps in a way to your own psychology, evil, angry, or greedy, or vengeful is something that keeps you from liberation. So this is the argument from illusion says, look, the only real reason why you shouldn't, go out and kill animals for fun is because being in that state of mind will keep you away from liberation. This is actually, I think this is in some sense related to this question we had at the beginning, which is like, if it's burning off karma, why not step on the bug? You shouldn't step on the bug because in this argument from illusion, that's a bad state of mind to be in. That's a kind of attachment, and attachment keeps you in the cycle of samsara. Yeah.
This one
yeah, also includes humans. Because you're not going to hurt our Atman either. I mean, again, it's the consensus in the kind of, or the widely held view that I've seen, sorry, I shouldn't say consensus, but like, the widely held view is that suffering is a little better for us to achieve moksha than pleasure. Because if you have a really nice, comfy life, you're like, heck yeah, I'll do this again. Reincarnate me. I'm having a great time. Whereas your life is kind of crummy, you're like, okay, I want off this ride. So like, why not let people suffer? Why not hurt people? And the answer is because that's from your perspective as the one who's deciding to hurt or not hurt, that's a impediment from moksha. Okay, so that's the argument from illusion. This is the argument. The argument is the only reason that you care about doing part is because of it's a little state, model state. Yeah, but what if you guarantee that makes it well let act. Like, hair. I know that's how we give it. Well, from anyone who's not on uses Arabics, technically, we're have a more slowly and stable way.
you can just an animal. How cool it take on to the normal person in heaven. Yet are good. Yeah. But it's a radically different way of the moral question does.
I don't know if this is the right thing you're struggling with here. Actually, that's the right question. I've actually heard a version of theology where process theology. I've only heard a sketch of it, but where God actually does need us to, like, God is in the process of becoming and needs us to live good lives to facilitate that. I find that very appealing aesthetically. I don't believe any of this stuff, but whatever. Okay. So Framarin wants to refute that. That was the argument from illusion. The only reason you should avoid early fairy tale is because it puts you to a bad headspace, a wrong headspace, to achieve liberation. Framarin says this in response to that. If it's not just intrinsically bad to hurt animals, why is that considered virtuous? So you need a certain amount of virtue to get you to moksha. You need to have lived a virtuous life to achieve liberation. Why is it that not hurting things is the virtuous thing and hurting things is the not virtuous thing? It becomes utterly weird and arbitrary. Why is it that hurting the maximum amount of, squish a million bugs and you'll get liberated? Why isn't it? It makes it completely arbitrary. And arbitrariness is usually a bad sign in a way of thinking. So there must be some sense that non-harm is the better way of living. Like, it's what gets you to the point where you could be liberated. So there must be some built-in principle to reality in this worldview where non-harm is just better because it's bad to hurt sentient beings, something like that. Yeah.
Well, to also say that, like, well,
Awkward. Yep.
How we live, like, it out in is fun slash or else it's there, like it has a, well, like, the effect on where it goes based on our deeds.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So you have where your Atman, your little slice of Atman is reborn is affected by your karma, but the Atman doesn't really mind where it's reborn. It's not hurt by pain and suffering. It's not happy or sad. It's timeless, eternal, and unchanging. It's crucial it's crucial to distinguish between Atman and sort of like my ordinary conscious experience. So it's like my ordinary conscious experience is going from one body to another. I pretty much want it to be a good rebirth. But Atman is something prior to that. It's the ground of that. I don't claim to have I have not realized Atman. So I don't claim to have a deep experiential understanding of what this is. I can just report what they say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think but kind of the sense how only you can give yourself.
Yep.
I mean, architected that I feel it is so nice in it. And there's only because that I don't have to do because you will that.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. So this is kind of this is the argument. So you think that's consistent with, like, the idea that humanity is the right balance of pleasure and pain? Is that the thought? Or I think I literally just didn't hear the first part of your comment.
I think that's the that not and Jordan
Yeah.
they have this
Right.
uh
Yeah.
they should be you.
But why is that? So this Framarin's response to that is, why is it that ahimsa is a good mind space? Why is that the good one rather than harm? Why is it a good mind space to be non-harmful, bad mind space to be harmful? Why is that? He might say, oh, I want to be non-attached to the world, so I'm going to wreck as much of it as I can. I'm going to destroy my home and my family and everything I see. You think, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. 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 Okay. So the ahimsa is a less involved state of mind. Interesting. Yeah. That might be this might be, you might reasonably reply to Framarin in a variety of ways. Yeah. That's not why actually. Because you're like going around wrecking stuff, you're definitely involved in other people's lives. Whereas ahimsa is just not doing that. So maybe it's the one that like is uninvolved. Maybe. Okay. Quick thoughts. We should probably move on. There's a few more to do, and I think people's brains are getting full. So, I do. We're constrained by both time and brain space. So, okay. So the argument from illusion is an argument that animals do not have direct moral standing. So by direct moral standing, he means that you have to care about them for their own sake. It's bad to hurt an animal because the animal is hurting. The argument from illusion is like, it's not bad to hurt an animal for its own sake. It's bad to hurt the animal for your sake. We're going to look at a couple of other arguments. Two other arguments that accept the idea that animals have direct moral standing. Framarin just thinks they have the reason why incorrect. So, interconnectedness interpretation. So why is it that animals and plants have direct moral standing? So there's a bunch of versions of this in the literature. The first time he looks at it says, look, the Hindu physics say all of nature is interconnected, and that underwrites the moral status of animals and plants. So we're all part of the same network of reality. So here's a version of this from Deutsch 1970. Here's a person giving the interconnectedness interpretation. So why is it we should care about animals and plants? Because we're all interconnected. Here's Deutsch saying that in a kind of extended way. The first and perhaps most obvious core idea needed by us to establish and sustain a proper relation with physical nature is the idea that everything in nature is interconnected with everything else. This means that nature is so constituted that any action performed will have its effect over a wide, complex, and often unforeseen terrain. According to the doctrine of karma, whatever one does will have effects not only in the immediate present, but in the long future as well. Any act, in short, will have consequences that reach out far beyond the act itself. So you got to care about animals and plants because we're all interconnected. What do you think before we go into Framarin's response? Is that plausible? The question is, why do you have to care about animals and plants for their own sake? Why is that? The answer given here is because we're all connected, and we're connected by a karma even beyond the end of your lifetime. Is that a plausible answer? Yeah. Good. Yeah. This seems to be like if you were an illusion person, yeah, this seems to be like not helpful at all. What if is this good? And I think you're exactly on the track that Framarin's going to go. Other thoughts before I do Framarin's response? Or your brain's getting full? Yeah.
If you think about this spiritual manipulation or
So I think we're just the literal is like we're just literally connected. And connection with the karma I drill on the people. That's not on the button.
over that, yeah,
Okay.
here's what I did. That's not called nothing.
So you might want to call it a spiritual. Might want to just call it causation. I think he's just talking about an normal and your absolute have consequences. Okay. I think the response
is actually really an interesting one. So first of all, Framarin says that's not what karma says. Karma says your actions will affect you in the future, not that your actions will have a wide-ranging influence on the world. And that doesn't connect all of life into a web. That connects literally you to yourself across incarnations. So the idea of rebirth means that you probably shouldn't eat animals, since you might be an animal yourself one day. You should stump for vegetarianism, because next time you might be born a pig and you might get eaten. But that's a prudential reason for not wanting to harm things, right? That's not an intrinsic one. I think this is like, what if it's I think it's just a really bad argument. Okay, this is just a really bad argument, this interconnectionist interpretation, because like, a bunch of things that don't matter are connected, and now that makes them important. What? If I knock down a bunch of dominoes, that doesn't make the dominoes suddenly important, right? Get some weird Rube Goldberg contraption that like makes a bunch of stuff happen in a bunch of interconnected ways, but none of it matters. That doesn't make it suddenly matter. It has to be things that matter being connected that makes them matter. It's that it matters intrinsically all by themselves. Now, being interconnected might heighten how much you're actually mattering. If things are connected in a web, that might mean they have consequences bigger than you would have thought. But that doesn't make a raccoon suddenly go from not important to important, does it? Interconnectedness doesn't seem to do that, as far as I can tell. This is what Framarin thinks. I think it's plausible. Okay. How about a sameness interpretation? So here's another argument. So what we've done so far, just to kind of shake it off. We're wondering, why do animals have intrinsic value? Why do animals and plants, why do you have to care about them for their own sake? So far, we've seen one argument, the argument for illusion, that you don't have to do that actually. And we've seen one argument that you do have to care about animals and plants for their own sake. I don't think it's a great one. Framarin convinced me that this is not a good argument. Anyway, you're welcome. Disagreement is always welcome. Lots of smart people have said this, so like it's not like it's a closed case, but that's one. Let's look at another one. So sameness interpretation. So these are ways of reading the kind of basic structure of Hindu philosophy, where animals and plants have intrinsic moral worth because we are all in some sense the same. So certain Hindu texts and traditions claim that individual living non-human entities in nature, such as animals and plants, are the same in some sense as Brahman. It's kind of like basic ground of reality. And of course, you care about Brahman. Brahman has moral standing, if anything does, right? So if you're the same as Brahman, and Brahman has direct moral standing, then so do plants and animals. If they partake of the universe, there you go. So in certain Hindu texts and traditions that claim that individual living non-human entities in nature, such as animals and plants, have direct moral standing. There you go. This is his test for a plausible environmental ethic for Framarin. It has to have this consequence that it attributes some moral standing to plants and animals. Yeah, what do you think? Sameness? This is, when you read stuff online or non-scholarly stuff, this is a really common interpretation you come across. That if you believe that we are all aspects of this kind of one fundamental unity, you're going to regard the world as sacred. Every part of it is in some sense participating in the kind of sacred oneness of everything. So you're going to try to be nice to it. Yeah.
It's like
That's just yeah.
like one thing.
Yep.
All these things fun.
Right. Yeah.
And there is, as we're arguments, there is nothing about nothing. And so what is different to our students that our actions can go against the law. We're fighting it for every back. Listen, anything the funny does says is get out.
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. I think that's very similar to where everyone's going to go with this. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Because this, that's what the bad is doing with
Right. Or what the wolf is doing is okay. Yeah. Yeah.
that causing them doing.
Good. Interesting. There is a kind of assumption that whatever's going on in nature is all right. And yeah, we could reject that. Good. Excellent. Okay. So, Framarin makes this reply. So this is the sameness interpretations. You should care about the whole natural world because we are all in some sense one. And Framarin says, Brahman doesn't have moral standing in anything like the way we do. Nothing you do is going to help the basic fundamental structure of reality. Nothing you do is going to hurt the basic fundamental structure of reality. Brahman is timeless, eternal, unchanging. You can't hurt something that can't change, and you can't help something that can't change. It's the line I've been sort of paraphrasing. Weapons do not cut the Atman, fire does not burn it, water does not wet it, wind does not desiccate it. The body being killed, the Atman is not killed, from the Bhagavad Gita. This is the ultimate principle of reality is simply on a different moral plane than us. So, like, you kill and eat a bunny, Brahman's fine. Brahman's doing just fine. Just fine. So it's sort of attributing more of the kind of individual qualities of people to Brahman than you want to do. It doesn't. The kind of text and descriptions don't sustain this. Like, you don't want to imagine Brahman as like a guy who has preferences or is like scared of being eaten and stuff like that. Yeah.
Also speak the option that get not other public parliament to office most about the
Good. So yeah. Good. So the if you didn't hear that on the report, I want to record this. That's a really good thought. You might say that it's very little to do actually with the outcomes. Brahman can't be heard in any given outcome, but it might be that your state of mind or your intentions can be good or bad. That's how it relates to something like now. Does that give? So I don't want to hurt the bunny because I don't want to be mean. Does that give intrinsic moral standing to the bunny? Or is it that there are good and bad, there are morally good and bad states for me to be in? I think you could, there are versions of, so what you're describing is so utilitarianism is a consequentialist moral theory, which is like what matters are the outcomes. There are a variety of moral theories that aren't like that, where your intention matters the most. Or so there's the virtue ethics, where actually the kind of character that you've got is what matters most. Or deontological ethics, where the intention to follow or not follow a rule is what matters most. So there might be a variety of ways where. I'm sorry, that was just such a. Don't worry about that if you've never heard of those things. If they're relevant to the class, we'll come back to them. But like the point is, I think you could very well spin a variety of answers to this that say, well, your intent is the central thing, not yeah, you can't hurt Brahman, but trying to take a swing at Brahman is bad. I don't know, like that. I think you could come up with something like that. It would all need to be kind of specified. This is from okay. So for us, the main thing is what all I want you to mostly get here is the kind of three arguments that we've done here. So this is all the intrinsic moral value of animals and how does that fit with Hinduism. We've seen the arguments from illusion that say they don't actually have intrinsic moral value. We've seen the interconnectedness interpretations. They say have value because we are all one. And it's like, well, a bunch of things that are all one that don't have value don't suddenly have value. There's the sameness interpretation, which is like there's something sacred at the heart of every animal because we all participate in Brahman. But then, like, you're not going to hurt Brahman is his response. Okay, so we got that. Those three arguments. So there's three arguments and three responses to them. Boy, that sounds like the kind of thing that would be on a midterm, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound like the kind of thing that really fits nicely into a midterm format? Just, I don't know. It's a weird thought that I had right now. Okay, so good on that. Okay, so Framarin, you're so smart guy. What do you think the answer is? Well, okay, so he doesn't tell us at any great length. I think his answer is actually super simple and straightforward. It's bad to hurt sentient beings. It's bad to harm things. He gives us this thought experiment, which is, I think, helpful in this context. And this is from early in the kind of environmental ethics literature, from an entirely different conversation. But consider the following scenario and see how you react to it. The last man or person surviving the collapse of the world lays about him, eliminating as far as he can every living thing, animal or plant, but painlessly, if you like, or as at the best abattoirs. What he does is quite permissible according to basic chauvinism, that is anthropocentrism, that is the idea that only humans matter. But on environmental grounds, what he does is wrong. Moreover, one does not have to be committed to esoteric values to regard Mr. Last Man as behaving badly. So, last surviving human. You could even have it that it's the last surviving animal. All the animals are gone, but rich, lush forests remain, forests and jungles, lots of plants. This guy decides with his last few hours, he's going to go out with a flamethrower and burn as much of it down as he can, just because he feels like it. Is that morally okay? Is the question. Framarin notes this it's not really an argument. Actually, this is supposed to trick you into making an argument to yourself. You imagine the scenario. What you're supposed to feel is like, oh, that's awful. Don't do that. Right? Anybody want to go to bat for the idea that it's fine? It's not going to be, I think partly this is an argument from embarrassment. Nobody wants to publicly go, yeah, from the trees. But I have the kind of like intuitive reaction to this, like, you shouldn't do that, man. Yeah.
Maybe if somebody else there, Joe.
Get back. So the structure of a thought experiment is just trying to it doesn't work for them. How it doesn't work. And again, this is early in the literature on art. Like, maybe if you read this and you go, that's fine, actually. You still open the admire thoughts.
I think the other question here is does life having value because what it regard what that thought and what it
Yep.
And what it did at the time.
But if it's intrinsic value, it's not even what it can provide to any other thing. It's just valuable just to exist. It's just good that life exists. Is the thought that he's trying to draw out of us. Not even to other forms of life. Like if there's just literally one tree on an otherwise dead planet, it's better that that tree exists than it doesn't exist. Kind of thing. Yeah.
And you kind of in the long of it.
Interesting. Good. Okay, good. Interesting. Yeah. So, Ridley, who wrote this, was specifically thinking about animals. Framarin thinks it works okay with plants, but we might disagree with that. We might go, actually, no. So this is supposed to be, this is an interesting litmus test for where you fall on a kind of variety of issues in environmental ethics. Do I care just about humans? That's one thing that you could think. Do I care only about complex animals? Do I care about anything that's sentient? Do I care about, so one position in environmental ethics is biocentrism, which is literally all life, sentient or non-sentient, has some value. And there's the most extreme version of it is literally all lives are equally important, which I hope if I go like this, I just killed a bunch of single cell organisms. I hope that that's not true. But it might be that they get non-zero value. It might be that there's no value to even single cell organisms. You might attribute more value to complex organisms.
you're going to owe some story about what it is that makes some life more valuable than other. You got to be really, that is of all the slopes, that is one of the slipperier ones when you start assigning differential hierarchy of values to various forms of life. You're going to be real careful with that one. But it's a thing that we could think. Okay, so but Framarin, when you're so smart, what's your answer? The answer is basically, look, all life is valuable and it's morally wrong to hurt living things, sentient things. Don't do that. That's why it's wrong. And what you get out of this is a kind of justification for the intrinsic. It's not that Hinduism justifies the intrinsic value of life. It's that basically anybody should accept that at least sentient life has some value. And then that's used as a premise in the kind of like thinking through this stuff. Why is it wrong to harm animals? Nothing to do with moksha or samsara or karma or anything. It's just wrong to hurt things. And then that kind of like that basic reasoning is accessible to, even if you don't believe any of the machinery of Hinduism, you can think that. And the way that this argument, this last man argument is framed, doesn't rely on you believing anything particularly. As he says, and moreover, one does not have to be committed to esoteric values. You can just think that life is valuable. You can just think that. I think most people regard at least sentient life as intrinsically valuable, at least somewhat. And Framarin says, yeah, I mean, this is just a kind of basic premise throughout the discussions. Yeah.
The thing about taking value, but
Yes.
always talks about no, it's not
Yeah.
number. But the kids in last garden, he's like sparkling the partner.
But
All I need to can't set up top.
Yeah.
So it's like you take some chill with that. But it was all
But-
not
But-
like those
Good, interesting. So you can read this, and I think another comment sort of hit on this already. You can read this from a kind of personal character. Well, you might respond to this guy and go like, "You're being a jerk, man." Like it's not like the tree. I'm not worried about the trees. I'm worried about this guy just being kind of nasty. And there are versions of morality that don't sort of like, it's not the kind of bean counting of suffering and happiness. It's be a good solid person. And you might say this guy's being a psychopath. And that's bad. There are some characters that are good and some that are bad. And you trying to destroy as much of the world as you can is probably a bad one. So that's one way of parsing this.
well, you could look at my
This is something Frame wasted.
yeah. Look, this one of the arguments was okay. Was that not your own? It's about you. Well, like I look at it. How to make it perfectly with it just by doing this. I feel that that's why it's world for opposed to the actual actions. Well, was it? Or
And
I guess there's this argument if that it's not true. Sorry.
Yeah.
But then it's the
So it might, again, in invoking this last man thought experiment, we're not given reasons why. We're just told it is, as a matter of fact, it's bad to hurt living things. It's a kind of ground level brute moral fact, I think, is what he's going to put it. I'm not satisfied with that, but that's the best I can do at the moment. Okay. Sorry.
I'm simply when I was
Yeah.
I didn't get that in the house. I don't know who
Right.
was finding my
Right.
starting to hear what is that now.
Yeah.
When I cooked up a solo mass with the where ends of the last video for all of our records starting that. Super different super. And if you have this job of like already settled on you, and it's become this conversation where you like super talented parents
Yeah.
with one guy. Which like so what he said to the athlete, well was not acceptable for enough. And he was some things to us.
Yeah. I mean,
Doesn't go anywhere.
Can you blame that? Yeah. Can you blame this guy? Hard to say what anybody would actually do in this. Like, I don't know that as the last human, I would do any better than this dude. That might be an indictment of my character, but yeah. Okay. One last thing. I think we've done a lot today. This has been great. Thank you for like kicking this stuff around with me. This has been awesome. Why is it okay to eat plants? I really try. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say that's
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Why is it okay to eat plants?
good food, topics of food.
Yeah.
It remember that it forms like Dr. Job,
Right.
Nick, this
Yep.
putting them to speak on so I understand then can't feel they can't suffer. So therefore it's bad to call us suffering.
Good.
And oops, and not our job becomes them suffering, but
Yes.
to it.
So something like that is going to be the Jain answer to this. But in Hinduism and Jainism, they do think plants can suffer. They do think plants can suffer. Not as articulately as we and complexly as we do, but they do think they can suffer. Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Usually of the why is not what it that more something than within good.
Yeah.
It's also back things.
That's how I feel as a professor. It's not, I don't want to inflict more suffering than I should, but also I need to inflict the right amount of suffering on you. Yeah, maybe. So this is, so yeah. Yeah.
Then just saying the thing, not that that's
Yeah.
So then if I got when you're enough this and text down and stuff, right? That's so can
I guess so. I have trouble seeing why that wouldn't also apply to animals, though. Like, I guess, yeah. The two basic answers that I found were, one version of this is it's not okay to eat plants. This is also accruing karmic debt. So don't eat more than you need to, and prefer to eat plants. Like if you eat an apple, it doesn't kill the tree. So sometimes some versions of plant-based foods kills the plant and some don't. So maybe eat stuff that doesn't kill the plant. Another is that there's basically so some version of actually what you were saying. There's a kind of divine sanction for humans to eat plants. We need them to live. If you don't eat plants, you're not going to get very far. You need them to live. We were built this way. The gods have decided that this is how it should be. So maybe, yeah, this is the right amount of suffering. The plants sort of like are going to suffer, but that's okay because that's the way the universe is structured. So, yeah.
well the you I don't know yeah, okay, this
Right.
one go by what you have it.
Yeah. Maybe you did in some sense. Yeah, anything with seeds, it's trying to get you to eat. Anything with seeds and fruit, it's trying to get you to eat it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Very briefly, I think the best answer that I found this is in a related. So Jainism is not Hinduism, but it shares a bunch of ideas and philosophies. They got a fairly specific answer to this question. They rank living things by the number of senses they have. So plants have only the sense of touch, but humans have 5 senses. So the amount of harm done by harvesting a plant is significantly less than killing an animal for food. Because the animal can see you coming, they can smell you, they will be wild with terror as you come towards them with the axe. The plant has, they're not going to have a great time, but they've only got the sense of touch. All they feel is, I've been cut down. But they really, I'm fascinated by the sort of Jain response to this question, because they really kind of take it to its logical conclusion. This is not like the normal layperson behavior, but if you're a monastic, if you're a monk in Jainism, you wear a mask over your mouth to try to avoid swallowing bugs. You might carry a broom to kind of sweep the ground in front of you to try to avoid stepping on any even invisible living things. And they care even, so they care about microorganisms as well. So the kind of respect for the kind of sanctity of life goes pretty far down. Jain monastics also prefer to like let the fruit fall off the tree before. You don't even pull fruit off the tree. You let it fall and then collect it, kind of thing. It's a very thoroughgoing respect for life. I think it's interesting. They explicitly say the reason to do this is because any harm is a manifestation of passion, which is hindrance to moksha. So they quite explicitly adopt one of the stories that Framarin thought was not quite good enough to attribute intrinsic value to life. It's a bit instrumentalized, but nonetheless, it results in this very thorough and deep respect for life. Yes.
It's say properly cost
Yep.
you respect others without touching your audience to them, but following fun of you. I just know the passion you do.
But you might have a passion for walking quickly and without worrying about bugs. Whereas this is there's more forbearance in making absolutely sure that every movement you make is non-harming. That's much more forbearing than actually going at shit. Yeah.
Then you that they are very passionate. You care about
there's any philosophy that involves non attachment, you might do a version of this. It depends on the specific definition of passion that they use. And sometimes, so in Buddhism, there's this metaphor, the raft, which is, you get attached to the teachings of Buddhism to get to the other side of the river and then throw them away. So one specific type of passion might be necessary to get you right to the cusp of liberation, and then you get rid of that as well, and then you're liberated. I don't know what specifically the Jain story is, but that's a fairly across philosophies with sort of non-attachment. Okay. I think we should call it there. That was fun, everyone. Let's do next time plant intelligence from a more modern scientific kind of view. We'll do the behavioral psychology of plant. Thanks.